We've talked a lot on this channel in the past year or so about just how much fast food chains like McDonald's have been struggling to get their customers back since prices have shot up tremendously. But the truth is, it's not just McDonald's. The entire restaurant industry is wobbling right now due to the increase in food prices, labor prices, as well as inflation. And whether we like to admit it or not, around 35% of Americans eat out at chain restaurants at least twice a week. That's a lot. But here's the problem. Inflation at restaurants has been going up roughly double what inflation has been just at the grocery store. So if you are somebody who regularly visits restaurants, you probably aren't visiting them as much anymore. And I have heard from many of you in the comment sections below about just that. People have said they've cut back tremendously on going out. Many people say they just don't eat out at all anymore due to the increased cost and the cost of living in general. And to give you a perspective here, from 2019 to 2025, menu prices have increased by 30 to 80% depending on the restaurant and the items that you order. That is insane. We've talked so much about McDonald's and the problems they're having. Well, take a look. McDonald's has seen their prices spike by about 40% on average since 2019. And I did a breakdown video a while ago, probably like a year ago, showing that some of their items since then have gone up over 200%. So that's just an average across the board, but some of the items have gone up tremendously. At IHOP, prices have gone up about 80% in the same time period. Chipotle, they've increased their prices about 70% in the past 5 years. And in fact, Chipotle's CEO just last week sounded an alarm on the economy about how much their business has been going down over the past several quarters because their younger demographic that typically goes to Chipotle hasn't been coming in. They don't have the income, especially disposable income. And that's why their stock price crashed 21% in just a week. Like, I guarantee, guys, if the S&P 500 or the Dow or NASDAQ crashed by 20% or more in just 1 week, everybody would be in all-out panic mode. People would say the stock market is crashing. But when it just happens to one individual company, especially if it's one you don't care about, people just say, whatever, shrug your shoulders and move on. And I don't really care what happens either way. I don't have a vested interest in Chipotle. But the reason I bring this up is to show you where things are with this economy right now. Wingstop is another restaurant that has been hit hard. Their stock price dived 26% over the past year and almost 14% just in October alone. Shake Shack, which is a very popular burger chain that's still not a franchise, it's still 100% corporate owned, their stock price is down to over 20% from 1 year ago. And not that long ago, Shake Shack was kind of bragging about how they were still doing pretty well compared to McDonald's and these other fast food restaurants, despite their food being more expensive. But it looks like that victory lap is coming to an end. And now fast forward to 2025, at least 15 major food chains have filed for bankruptcy, and there's been a 50% surge in restaurant bankruptcies, including independent restaurants, from just 2024 to 2025. In fact, restaurants accounted for about 12% of all bankruptcies in 2025. Some of the biggest revenue losers over the past year have been KFC with $250 million in losses, Chipotle at $150 million in losses, Popeyes with $91 million in losses, TGI Fridays has $100 million in losses, Hooters has $80 million in losses, Denny's has lost $40 million, Papa John's has lost $30 million, and Subway and Hardee's have lost $10 and $15 million respectively. And it's just so annoying when people say, oh, I went to a restaurant yesterday and you couldn't even get a table. It was so packed. I had to wait for 2 hours and the place was just hopping. Like, that's always going to happen regardless of how bad things get, because certain restaurants are always going to be worth the price. The value is there, the food is fantastic, and once that gets around and people who can afford it know about it, it's going to be perpetually busy no matter what's going on, because there's always going to be people that can afford to go out and spend that extra couple $100 on dinner. You can see the fog starting to roll in through the Golden Gate. That's pretty cool. But as you can see by the restaurants that I just listed off, these are not fancy places. KFC, Chipotle, TGI Fridays, Hooters, Denny's, etc. These are yet again restaurants that cater to the middle and lower income consumer, just like McDonald's. And these are the businesses that are suffering. Burger King is another one that has been hurt big time in the last 5 years. They're closing around 377 stores nationwide. Denny's is closing 90 stores. TGI Fridays closing 100. In fact, there used to be one in South Beach. They closed it like 2 years ago already. Jack in the Box, they're closing 120 restaurants. Applebee's is closing 30. Hardee's is closing 145. Wendy's is closing 72, and Popeyes is closing up to 30 locations. And they say there's up to 20,000 job losses expected from these restaurant closures in 2025, but I would estimate it's probably a lot higher because these are a lot of restaurants closing down. And really the reason behind all of this is inflation, something we talk about a lot here on the channel. And with what the Fed is doing right now, it seems like they have no desire to actually fix the inflation problems in this country. They had sort of this pretend fight on inflation ever since 2022 when they started hiking interest rates. They never hiked them high enough to actually squash inflation. It has been consistently going up over the past several reports, and here they are cutting rates. And since we know that inflation doesn't seem to be a top priority for the Fed or our government, well, that means you as a consumer and somebody who needs to buy things needs to plan accordingly. This is why I'm telling people all the time, you need to find a second source of income. You need to find a way to increase your income in some way, shape, or form that makes the most sense for you. You know, if you just increase your income by only 20% a month, let's say you make $5,000 a month, or your household does, and you can increase that to an extra $1,000 a month. Imagine how much of an extra buffer that will give you if you can save all that money and reduce expenses at the same time. And like we talked about in the SNAP benefit video, these increases in food prices and basically everything else are permanent. Don't expect these prices to come down. You know, the Fed's goal, remember, their target rate of inflation is 2% per year. Well, right now we're sitting at over 3% with the official numbers, and they don't seem to care. And of course, the food prices are up much more than that. But the point that I'm making here is that these prices are not going to come down because even when things are good and working properly, the Fed is still targeting at least a 2% price increase on everything year over year. So their goal is to never make things go down. That would be deflation, and they say that's bad for the economy. One of my viewers asked me to talk about that, and I will in a future video, but not today.